to this Ivanti video that will help you to improve the accuracy of your license compliance by checking and correcting hardware configurations in License Optimizer. Some of your enterprise software will be licensed based on the specifications of the hardware that it is installed on rather than the number of people who use it. For example, you can choose to license SQL Server either by the number of users or by the number of processor cores that there are on the server that is running it. At some point, it becomes cheaper to license based on the hardware than on the number of users. And if you can't determine the number of users because it is external facing, then you must use processor-based licensing. For this reason, it is important to correctly record aspects of your hardware specifications in License Optimizer. If we look at my current data summary, you can see that for this instance of DB2, I have a liability of 100, a surplus of 1,820, and a total license quantity of 1,920. This looks a little suspicious when you notice that we are using the metric IBM PVU, but I'm mainly showing you this so that I can demonstrate the effect that changing hardware configurations can have on your license position. We'll come back to this later. PVU stands for Processor Value Unit, which is the method that IBM used to determine licensing requirements for different processors. On their website, IBM documents the PVU per core for different processors. You can then determine the number of PVUs that you require by multiplying the PVUs per core for your processor by the number of cores on the processor and then by the number of these processors on your server. Other vendors offer licenses based on the number of processor cores, irrespective of the specific processor, so you don't need to capture quite as much information. Ivanti Endpoint Manager usually does a very good job of discovering the required hardware information, so if you're using that to get your data into License Optimizer, then you're probably okay. But it's worth checking that this information is being captured. Let me show you a quick way of doing this. Let's look at my hardware records. On the navigation bar, under Estate Management, click Hardware. By default, the columns that we are interested in aren't displayed on the hardware data grid, so let's add them. Above and to the right of the data grid, click the Columns menu. Then, from the Columns sub-menu, select CPUs and Cores per CPU to add these columns. In the filter box above the CPUs column, type 0 and then press Enter. The data grid refreshes to show only those OSIs that have no CPUs recorded. Clearly, these OSIs must have at least one CPU and therefore are missing this value. The same is true for any OSIs where the cores per CPU is 0. If I click the link in the OSI name column for this record where the CPU count is 0, I can see more information about the OSI. You can see that the entire device type section is empty. If I then click the Installed Software tab, I can see that this OSI is running a version of IBM DB2 that is using a PVU metric. This is going to cause us a problem. License Optimizer has no knowledge of the processors on this server, so it will assign a default value so that the reconciliation can complete. But this will give us an inaccurate answer. For most products, such as SQL Server, we could just add the CPU count and the cores per CPU. But for IBM products, we need more information. Click Search alongside the device info to display the device information dialog. I know that the processor on this server is an IBM Power 8 870 and that it has 8 cores. When I click OK, the dialog closes and the OSI page for the server updates with the values I have set. I also know that this server has 2 of those processors, so let's set that value. If I check on the IBM website, I can see that this processor has a value of 120 PVUs per core. So let's do the math. 120 times 8 times 2 is 1920. Now I need to save these changes and run a new reconciliation. Let's pause here while the reconciliation runs. Here is my new data summary. You can now see that I have a liability of 1920, which matches my total license quantity to give me 100% compliance. I can use the drop-down at the top of the page to show the previous reconciliation results. You can see the significant difference that setting the correct processor details has made. The message from this video is to add the CPU count and the cores per CPU columns to the hardware page, and check that any OSIs that have 0 for either of these values are not running software that has a licensing metric that depends on these values being set correctly. I'm going to cover some more strategies for improving your compliance in future videos, so be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss them. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it useful.